Dharwad, a virtual platform for the literary and cultural events. Dear audience, as you know, Dharwad Katte started during the times when the whole world was attacked by the terrible experience of COVID pandemic. Since then, Dharwad Katte making it as an opportunity. It's been organizing several programs on the Jnanapita awardees on the birth anniversary of eminent writers, scholars, and many series like Makers of Modern Word Theatre. In this connection, Dharwad Katte started two parallel series. As you know, the first and second Saturday of every month will be in Kannada. The talks will be in Kannada, that is on Makers of Modern Word Theatre. And the another series that will be on the third and fourth Saturdays of every month is on the revisiting Shakespeare's plays. So, in this connection, today, on the half of this second series, we have a talk in English, that is, in this series, revisiting Shakespeare's plays. Today, we have with us Professor Veda Sharan, an eminent uh, professor of English, great scholar, versatile reader from Hyderabad, EFLU University. Sir, I welcome you for the program. I also welcome Professor Basavaraj Donur, President Dharwad Katte, and also Registrar, Central University of Karnataka. I also welcome all the audience and members of Dharwad Katte, and also our media persons who have been uh, making it possible to reach all the events to our audience in their print and electronic medias. A few words about Professor Veda Sharan sir. Professor Veda Sharan sir is a professor of English in the English and Foreign Languages University in the Department of English as Second Language Studies. Sir is interested in teaching reading in British and US literature, Indian and European history and lexicography. He is a member in the BOS in several state and central universities. He has delivered more than hundreds of talks at the national and international conferences. Uh, Today, Sir is going to deliver his talk on the marginalized in selected dramas of Shakespeare. Sir, I welcome you, and now over to Professor Veda Sharan sir.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash, for your very kind words. Um, as always, you're more kind than correct to me. So, my gratitude to you for this very generous introduction. uh, Today, I've titled this, I decided to focus on uh, the marginalized in Shakespeare, which uh, I define in a very, very broad way. And Dr. Prakash, can we present that PDF? I mean, sorry, the.
Yes, sir.
I decided to look at the term marginalized in a very, very broad category. Marginalized in the sense of the ordinary, common people that we find around us, and how Shakespeare portrays these people in his dramas. So most of the time we focus on the the major characters who definitely will attract our attention when we look at them. But I thought the marginalized are as important as the major characters are, in the sense that they uh, offer so many opportunities for the drama, for the plot, a variety of characters, and a lot more. So, how is it that Shakespeare is sometimes called the greatest dramatist in the world, which of course is a debatable statement. Um, because I'm sure people of every country will have their own greatest dramatist. And Shakespeare, who certainly claimed to be one of the greatest dramatists the world has ever seen. I mean, I don't need to emphasize this point. This aspect of the uh, marginalized in Shakespeare, I think, is has been considered before, but I thought I'd give it my slant in it and see how it goes. For this, I have decided to focus on Henry the Fourth, Part One, a little bit of King Lear, uh, as you like it, and try to see how the minor characters, the marginalized characters are portrayed here in relation uh, to the major characters. It's not working out, Prakash. I don't know
Sir,
if I can.
I'm trying the recent one which you sent. I
Yeah.
just try, sir.
So I titled this talk as "Small Beer to Tickle Brain." The marginalized in select dramas of Shakespeare. Maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the title here. Small beer has two meanings. Small beer is weak beer, which doesn't have too much of an alcoholic content, I suppose. But small beer is also another term for the ordinary people. So small beer are the marginalized, ordinary people that we see around us, as distinct from the royalty and the high upper class people. And tickle brain is a kind of drink that really affects the brain and can cause major disruptions in behavior, as you all know. So this is how I have titled this thing. This small beer would refer back to the ordinary people. I have taken this expression from Henry the Fourth, Part One, where, as we shall see, Hall or the Prince uses it. A little bit about shall we say, a brief preview or a review of Henry the Fourth. You know that the drama is actually titled Henry the Fourth Part One, but the real hero is Henry's son, the Prince Hall. So it is his interaction with the ordinary people that forms a major part of the play, as you all know. This is just a reminder about these things. Uh, so I began with a quotation from Dr. Johnson, in which he says, "In the writings of other poets," I quote now, "in the writings of other poets, a character is too often an individual. In those of Shakespeare, it is commonly a species." So here, Dr. Johnson is saying that the individual character becomes a species rather than remaining a single character here, and probably he means that the character as portrayed by Shakespeare is representative of of humanity itself. So, in that sense, uh, yeah, I hope it's there now. So, I believe that Shakespeare could do this because of what Keats called his negative capability, his ability to get into a character's, into a human's head and not ask questions about why this person is so, but simply to accept that person as that person is, without asking any irritating questions. If you remember in that letter, talking about negative capability, which Keats doesn't define, he talks about um, Coleridge, who was incapable of not asking questions about people and rationalizing their behavior. And, and this, according to uh, Keats, is a minus point. And Shakespeare's greatness is that he accepts a person as they are and portrays them in all the reality that is there. So, uh, if we can get on to the next slide. Yeah, in the drama, uh, Henry the Fourth, Part One. Uh, could we say this thing? In Part One of Henry the Fourth, Falstaff, who is a very very fat man, believes that his friend Peto, who is very slim, has been placed beside him to set off his fatness by contrast, and this is something that upsets Falstaff very much. This is I taken this somewhat humorous example because the whole drama is complete with is full of such contrasts, and these contrasts are sometimes intended and unintended. When we come to the marginalized people here, as Hall looks at them, Prince Hall, who mixes with these rowdy characters uh, all the time. He spends most of his time there, much to the disappointment of his father. Hall is surprised by him at his own uh, ability to remember the names of these characters here, of the small beard, as he calls them. And yeah, that the very fact that he remembers this name is something that he's not supposed to do as a big as a big man, as a future king. But as his, can we go to the next slide? But his father reminds him that marginalization is not very far from the royals themselves, because even the marginals can be, even the royals can be marginalized. The previous king, whom Henry displaces or usurps the throne from, was Richard II, who kind of made himself a very ordinary person by mixing with people all the time, and as Henry puts it very vividly to his son, gave his countenance, I'm quoting here, gave his countenance against his name, to laugh at jibing boys and stand the push of every beardless vain comparator. Uh, Here, Richard II mixes with the ordinary people and makes himself a very common person there. And as a result of that, he loses his respect among the people. and becomes like a very ordinary person here. So we can say that, uh, we may not be able to turn a saucier into a silken purse, but with sufficient violence, we can turn a silken purse into something like a saucier. And in the end, Richard ends up being heard and not regarded, and his presence, uh, his frequent presence, makes everybody tired of him. They are glutted, gorged, and full, the ordinary people. Shakespeare uses a gustatory metaphor here, a metaphor from food, where we have overeaten and we feel nauseated with having what we have eaten. And these and the ordinary people looking at King at Richard II have become sick of his presence, and that is one reason why he is. It is very easy for Henry to overthrow him. Um, but the usurpation itself causes a lot of disruption and trouble in the country, and the result of that is a degradation of the king's name, of the name of name and status of the king. Uh, so uh, it falls into the royalty falls into disrepute, and Akash, can we move the screen up a bit? If you could stop it there for a minute. Yeah, this is what Richard becomes. He's heard and not regarded, and his presence having made everyone glutted, gorged, and full. And uh, the resulting bad name that royalty gets by this usurpation is parodied in a very one of the most comic scenes in Shakespeare, where Falstaff pretends to be Henry IV in a tavern or in a restaurant, and there is the hostess of the tavern, the owner of the hostess, who's a woman of very poor repute, who pretends to be his queen, and uh, the dialogue there is very funny, which you should read and reread many times. Uh, so uh, Falstaff says that Henry is his Hall is his son because his wife tells him that he is his son, but he knows him chiefly by the uh, foolish hanging of his nether lip, the lower lip, which he thinks is very beautiful, and that is how he knows that he is his son. Now, this degradation of royalty into this kind of parody is a direct result of Henry's usurpation of the throne. And this is how Shakespeare uses the ordinary people as a metaphor or as a measure of the strength of the of kingship in England at that time. And in that sense, the marginalized can play a very, very uh, important role because it helps us understand what exactly is happening in the kingdom. And then that is how we can say that the margins can be unstable and shifting because of the continuous way in which they change. Here, can we go up a little? But what happens in Henry IV is that but both King Henry IV and his son, the future Henry V, who is the real hero of the drama, as I said before, though the drama is called King Henry IV, Henry IV is not the hero of the drama. He's only the titular hero. The real hero is Hall, his son, and Hall mixes with he goes around with the ordinary people, simply to uh, show later on how great he is as a king. He joins these people in all their antisocial activities such as robbing and drinking, and he carefully cultivates, let us say, this history of being a rowdy character, because when he becomes king, he will suddenly throw away all these bad habits and show himself as a perfect king. And he is very successful in that because the British love Henry V as a very, very successful king, and a king who restores the dignity of the throne. So here, the marginalized are used as a kind of background against which the real greatness of Henry V in the drama Prince Hall will shine forth by contrast. So this is something that is very central to both father and son. We have seen before how Henry IV criticizes Richard for exposing himself in the ordinary, for being present in the ordinary people until they are sick and tired of him. But he himself is never present there only until it is absolutely necessary. And then people are eager to see him, they wonder and they discuss him among themselves. And this is one point that Henry IV also makes. So both of them are involved in showing off themselves to the people. I think we can relate a lot of these things to the modern situation that we have here, where people are more interested in show than in anything else. Uh, yeah. So next one, please. So, looking at the way in which Dr. Johnson, in which Shakespeare develops Falstaff's character, the humor, the complexity of his character, uh, Dr. Johnson has a lot to say about him, and can go up a little more. I'm sorry, this is not uh, going along. So Dr. Johnson criticizes Falstaff as a model and says he's not someone who should be followed. And this is not surprising because uh, Falstaff is modeled after the comic character in the morality plays that were there before drama developed in England. So the devil would go around with a dagger of lath and was a very, very funny character at that time. But this character, like Falstaff, can impress the viewer or the reader as a very, very real person, and uh, you can so real that you can actually address him and talk to him as if he were standing before you, and that is how Dr. Johnson uh, talks to him and he says, Falstaff, my Falstaff, how can I describe thee? And you can see the kind of love that Dr. Johnson has for these things. And this great lexicographer, this man who wrote the first modern dictionary in English, does not find the words to actually describe how delightful Falstaff is, and that is how wonderfully, uh, hilariously, and beautifully Shakespeare has shown Falstaff in this in the drama. Next one, please. But among the marginalized people itself, there is an hierarchy because there is no among the lower people, there are still lower people. And Falstaff himself, when the war comes, recruits very weak and useless fellows with the money that he takes from the king and uses them more or less as cannon fodder. He knows that they're going to be killed off in the war, but very cynically, he puts them up there as soldiers because he's given money to recruit more soldiers for the war against the rebels. And in that sense, we find that among the marginalized themselves, there is a lot of exploitation. The next one. Yeah. Uh, but even though the marginalized are taken as cannon fodder available for their use at any time, there is still there's still this feeling that they are the responsibility of the king is to take care of the ordinary people, and this is one of the turning points in Lear, who in the storm scene for the first time realizes how much suffering uh, his uh, his people would have undergone uh, because of his neglect of them throughout his career. And if we look at King Lear as a drama that traces the education of Lear into maturity, where he can say that ripeness is all, we can see that this is one important stage where he can one important stage where you can see that he is learning his lessons. In the next slide, Prakash, talking of the poor naked wretches in the pitiless storm, the old man regrets, oh, I have taken too little care of this. And this is one concern that he at last expresses for the marginalized. Next one, please. And then he even blames God for the suffering of the people here when he says he's kind of personifies pomp, wealth, and says take physic pomp because um, pomp is full of sin and needs to be treated. Expose thyself to feel what these wretches feel in the storm, he says. Thou mayest shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. So here we see that he's pleading with the rich people to uh, give the poor people the excess money that they have, the excess wealth that they have, so that the poor people can have some kind of comfort in life. And yeah, and God Himself will appear more just if He looks at these things. Yeah, and then, as I said just now, this is a very important stage in Lear's education when he realizes his responsibility to the ordinary people of his kingdom. Next one, please. Uh, then in the scene where Cordelia is hanged, I think he kills the man who hangs him, and uh, and he feels very tired, and it's very hot, and he feels very tired, and he turns to a servant nearby and he says, this very interesting line, I pray you, undo this button. Thank you, sir. Shakespeare put a comma after thank you to make the pause there, to show that this is it's not said out of habit, but out of real respect. The word sir comes out very carefully in a very deliberate manner because of the pause here. And the respect that the old man shows, even to a servant, is something that marks an important part in his important stage in his growth as a king. So this is one point where most dramatists don't recognize. I mean, actors don't pause here, but I think the comma here is very significant because the word "sir" is so deliberate after the pause, and so you can say that at last, finally, the old man grows up. Can we can do the next slide? Yeah, the next one, please. Uh, Not only is the are the marginalized people interesting in the characterization, but also in the language that is given to them. And this language can be really amazing, as always. So one example I have taken here is from Caliban here, from the Tempest, and even when he curses, his language is absolutely beautiful, as you can see in the quote below here. Can you move this up, Prakash, a bit? As wicked you as ever, my mother brushed with raven's feather. That one, that part here. You can see how beautiful the language is here. It's so vivid. His mother is, as you know, a witch, and she has magical powers. And he is cursing them here. And even in this language, uh, even in a curse, the language is so stunningly beautiful and vivid in its portrayal. And that is why Dr. Johnson thought that Shakespeare had invented a new language or a new idiom for Caliban. So it is that kind of importance Shakespeare gave even to the marginalized people in his character in his dramas, that he went on to develop a new style, a new way of speaking for all for the for the marginalized characters here. So uh, we can do a lot of discussion here where uh, a lot of criticism has come in for the Tempest because it is seen as a perfect portrayal of a white man colonizing a foreign country and exploiting it for his own, uh, his own benefit. Uh, but there are a lot of things that can uh, kind of mitigate at least this criticism. When Caliban says that uh, he doesn't have to be grateful to Prospero because he has taken away his land and so on. Uh, Caliban claims that this land was his but because of his mother who owned the land. And when Prospero says that he taught him the language, Caliban retaliates by saying that my profit on learning this language is that I know how to curse. That could be one way of looking at it. But uh, we wonder what other language Prospero would have taught him. He surely would not have known Caliban's mother tongue. So he taught him the only language that he knew. And then when we see that uh, Caliban was ill-treated, it is only because he tries to rape Miranda, and he was prevented from doing that by Prospero. And it's really difficult to understand why people should find fault with Prospero here for keeping Caliban out of the house. I think it's a very understandable situation. Now, Caliban can be seen as a very wicked person here, but he's one dynamic character who changes and develops. He realizes that Prospero is a really good man in many ways, in spite of all his weaknesses, and he can shift his loyalty uh, to the man that he thought was actually oppressing him. If you can look at the next slide, Prakash. Yeah, you will see that Caliban grows up and he feels ashamed that he was following Trinculo, and he changes into a better person. But there is the white man, Antonio, who enjoys killing simply for the sake of killing. And he is seen as one character, he's shown as one character who can never change really in all his life, because his very nature is evil. So when we say that Shakespeare is being, racist here, it's not really sustainable. I'm addressing the criticism made by some African writers. I'm sure you know those names. I don't need to mention them here. So these are some of my points that I uh, wanted to put before you about Caliban here. And then there's also a lot of other linguistic aspects that uh, make these characters very interesting and very rich. Sorry. So now some of the uh, um dialogues that we hear in such dramas as A Midsummer Night's Dream and so on are very interesting because of the wordplay that is indulged in there. So I think the name came later, but the idea itself was there much before. Um, so here you have one example of malapropisms, which you know comes from Richard Brinkley Sheridan's famous drama The Rivals, where Mrs. Malaprop, who is an uneducated woman, thinks that people will respect her if she speaks very high, long, unusual words. And of course, it's only going to end in disaster. So she describes her own speech as a nice derangement of epitaphs. Actually, she should have said epithets there. So that's a malapropism, but Shakespeare anticipates this malapropism in the drama itself. Um, by having examples of um, we can find examples of malapropisms here in the drama, where uh, Bottom is transformed into an ass by the fairies, and his friend looks at him and says, "Oh, Bottom, thou art translated." This is one example of malapropism. The name wasn't there during Shakespeare's time, but it came later on. And now, when we come to Hamlet, we have the gravedigger scene there, which is the central scene in Hamlet, because it structurally and thematically it is the center of the drama, and a lot of its significance is derived from the fact that it is uh, it is the clowns who indulge in a very complex wordplay there, which I don't have the time to recollect here, where they discuss whether Ophelia committed suicide, or whether she was killed off, or whether she deserves a Christian burial or not, and so on. So that's a very interesting kind of dialogue. And when Hamlet and Horatio come there, they continue their interaction with the gravediggers, and these are guys who take from a lot of pride in their own profession, and they have their own riddles and so on that they play with, and they find that the most permanent houses that anybody builds are the graves, because the other houses will collapse. So, in his frustration, Hamlet mutters words, words, words when he's talking to Polonius, if you remember. So, this is how interesting the language that Shakespeare gives to ordinary people is, and I think it deserves a study by itself. Can we get down to the next one? So, and then you have this. Yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that the grave diggers have a very complex language that is full of legal terms that Shakespeare gives them, and the contrast between the seriousness of the legal terms and the situation in which these guys are put in, are using them, makes the whole situation a very grimly ironic and very uh, a very funny situation also at the same time. Now I would like to bring you back to Macbeth, where we have the murder scene there, the where the bodyguards are outside, and they pretend that they are drunk. And sorry, they pretend that they are the guardians of hell, the gatekeepers of hell, and in their drunkenness, they think that they are not the uh, guardians of the guards at Duncan's door, but they are the gatekeepers in hell. Now, this is one scene that is really interesting because of the tremendous irony in the situation, where uh, the audience knows that in a very real sense, because the king is murdered, what they are seeing is hell itself there. The palace has now become hell because the king is murdered, and the gatekeepers do not have uh, any idea about how correct they are. They are more correct than uh, they're more correct and accurate than what they really think they are. And this knowledge that the audience has, the difference between what they are saying and what they know, constitutes a very interesting kind of irony, and it really uh, strikes the listener and the reader. Okay, and then when we uh, when we see that the words that these ordinary people are using about the king, making fun of them by parodying them and in many ways insulting them, we can also see that the lesa majeste, the insult that the royalty suffers at the hands of the marginalized, can also uh, learn something from the marginalized, in the sense that they can uh, they can show the upper classes can show their greatness by treating the ordinary people well, as I shall show you here. And then can we just go up? In As You Like It, for example, Orlando is ejected from his property and from his house, and he goes away to the forest with his old servant, Adam, whom he treats not as a servant but as a father. And you can see that the word Adam is referring back to the first man that God made. And um, he treats this man with a lot of respect. And Adam himself, as if you remember, offers him the money that he has saved. And this father and son kind of characters go into the forest, and I want to draw your attention to one poem that I'm sure all of us have taught, the Seven Ages of Man, where Shakespeare shows that in infancy the child begins teethless or toothless, and then ends up toothless as an old man. Uh, so he's suggesting that this is a This is how meaningless human life is, and it's a very frequently anthologized poem, and I'm sure all of us have either read this or and taught this thing. But this is a terrible, terrible misrepresentation of Shakespeare's own philosophy, because we can see that the dramatist is much wiser than his creation, than his character. You can just go down here. Okay. Go up a bit. Next slide. Uh, after Jackie's speaks out this so-called philosophy of the seven ages of man, Shakespeare has this stage direction that says, "Enter Orlando with Adam." This is something really remarkable because, in a way, it's a slap on Jackie's face, because Shakespeare is asking him this question: in your list of human activity of the seven stages, where is this expression of selfless love between two people who are not related to each other, but really care for each other? And this is a huge gap. It is something that Jackie can never understand in his whole life. And you will see that he is an antisocial element who cannot live in society, and he chooses to stay back in the forest. And this is the philosophy of a man who is obviously such a tremendous misfit, and has really no place in society for himself. I mean, he excludes himself from society. And we take this man's speech as a summary of human life. And that is really very ironic, but this is a very popular poem because it looks very philosophical. But actually, I think Shakespeare is laughing at Jackie's and rejecting his philosophy. So I would like you to keep that in mind the next, because it is inevitable that this poem will turn up in the textbooks. I want you to keep this in mind, that it is not Shakespeare's philosophy uh, at all. It is something that the drama itself rejects with this very simple and very powerful stage direction: Enter Orlando with Adam. It happens immediately after Jackie completes his listing of the seven stages in man. So this is, I think, Shakespeare is saying that this kind of pure, selfless love is something that can redeem our life and give it meaning. So in that sense, it is a very important kind of direction, I would say. And please keep this in mind when you look at it. Coming down to um, so what I'm saying here is that when you take these words out of context, they mean something that they really do not are not supposed to mean. It is a very incomplete, partial view of life that Shakespeare presents to us, and sometimes I wonder uh, how Shakespeare would have got some of these ideas. The one of the most influential modern dramatists, John Millington Singh, once said that once he thinks of Shakespeare walking in the market, overhearing a very interesting phrase, line, or expression by an ordinary person, and rushing home to note it down to be used in his place. I think that is how Singh would have got some of his ideas and uh, some of his expressions. So, what I'm trying to say here is that um, there would be a lot of understanding, interaction that would have gone on between Shakespeare and the ordinary people. And if Singh is right, some of his uh, famous expressions would have been taken from ordinary people that who would have overheard. Shakespeare would have overheard in the market or some such public place. Now, there are innumerable characters that can show Shakespeare's deep compassion for the ordinary people. One example I can refer you to is Juliet's nurse, who has a rambling kind of speech, and that shows us how deeply Shakespeare has studied ordinary people. So, having said these things about some positive aspects of Shakespeare's view of the ordinary people, we should not forget that Shakespeare presents them in all their reality, and he scorns the ordinary people because they have they have a very short memory and they are very fickle-minded. The mobile vulgus, as the Latin phrase puts it, you can see this in action in the in Julius Caesar, where people are preparing to receive Caesar and they have this huge decorations and all those things until they are reprimanded by the aristocrats and sent home. So uh, they they are shown as full of sweat and they smell of cheap foods and so on in Shakespeare. And this is a scorn that Shakespeare has for the ordinary people. They are very prone to violence. It's very easy to make them violent. And there are a lot of other faults that Shakespeare uh, shows. And as you can see in the drama, Antony knows this weakness of the people and he manipulates them by his words uh, a destructive into a destructive mob. Okay, and it's interesting to see how Shakespeare himself has been viewed by later dramatists, later writers, later workers. If you can remember this very interesting essay by Matthew Arnold, uh, where he talks about sweetness and light. Okay, so in this essay, he talks about uh, how Shakespeare would have been terribly bored and unable to relate to those people on the Mayflower, the ship that took the Europeans to the Americas. Okay, and this essay called "Sweetness and Light" is a very interesting essay that Anna wrote, which he never defines what he means by those things, but uh, it is how modern writers or later writers can look at Shakespeare for his sophisticated thinking and his compassionate portrayal of human beings. There was something called muscular Christianity in Arnold's time, something that repelled him very much, and he really thinks that this vulgarity Shakespeare would have despised and would have been very uncomfortable joining these people. So, yeah, that's about the main points that I wanted to say. Uh, if we look at dramas like Julius Caesar, the idea that we can slip into evil is a very, very great possibility and something that can happen almost without our knowing it. That there is this abyss just behind us, and it's very easy for us to fall into it, is something that we need to remember. And I think Shakespeare shows us, warns us against all these evils that are there among the good and the upper classes and the lower classes. So, in the end, if we ask the question, are the marginalized more sinning than more sinned against than sinning? I think it would be a very complex question to ask, and there can be a lot of um different kinds of answers. Okay, I think I'll stop here with that. I just had to rush through these things because there was some problem with the thing itself, and so some points I wanted to elaborate, I just kind of telescope them into a shorter thing, because I thought we could have some time for questions. Uh, Anybody wants to ask something, I'd be most happy to try and address those things.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor Donur, President Dharwad Katte, to speak a few words. Sir, please.
Good evening, Prakash. Am I audible?
Sir, you are audible, sir.
Yes,
Please.
yes, you are audible, Dr. Donor.
Hello,
Sir, you are audible, sir. Sir, please speak.
Dr. Prakash. Am I audible?
Sir, sir, you are audible, sir. You are audible. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. There is some disturbance. I am traveling. I request all the audience to kindly excuse me. Good evening to you. We have heard a wonderful talk by Professor Veda Sharan. He's one of the finest professors of English in the country today. He's my senior and my well-wisher. It's a wholesome speech in the sense it was a complete speech, very powerful speech, and he talked about 7 to 8 major plays of Shakespeare, and he succeeded in drawing our attention to different dimensions of Shakespeare's plays, and also to very important major characters and minor characters, and all the nuances of Shakespeare's plays. And Professor Veda Sharan is a professor of language and literature. That's the reason why he talked about Shakespeare's language as well. I don't have much to add to what he has said because it was a well prepared, well drafted, and well delivered speech. I thank him for accepting our invitation and delivering a very good talk on Shakespeare's major plays. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
we must thank you for your generosity and for your magnanimity and for your scholarship, sir. We are proud of you. And Shakespeare is one writer whom we often go. The reason why we often go to Shakespeare is he has answers to a lot of our questions, and he takes us directly to life, and he introduces us to different complexities of life. That's very important. He explains to us what is life, what is friendship, what is love, what is death, what is enmity. And he also talks about power and all other major important questions concerning power, power structure, gender issues, and so on. So we are not tired of talking about and on Shakespeare. And a teacher of English can't help reading Shakespeare, can't help going back to him again and again for the beautiful, wonderful characters that Shakespeare has created, and for the very creative use of language. You know, I love Shakespeare's poems and sonnets and plays for language, and I love his plays for many other reasons as well. So Dharwad Katte thought that we thought we should organize lectures on Shakespeare. Our intention is to organize lectures on all the plays of Shakespeare, and we are in the process. We have already 6 to 7 very good English scholars, professors have delivered their talks on different plays of Shakespeare, and we will also arrange talks on all the remaining plays of Shakespeare in the days to come. With this, I call it a day, and you can interact with Professor Veda. Thank you so much, sir, once again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for the generosity, Dr. Dondu.
If anybody would like to ask a question, interact with Professor Veda Sharan.
Sir, namaste, sir. Myself is Sachin Kumar. I am a student of Central University of Karnataka, sir. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes. Good evening.
Yes, Sachin.
Sir, from this session, I gained some knowledge, sir. But my doubt is about the Tempest, the last novel of William Shakespeare, sir. As per some people told that Tempest is related to his real life experience, and it tells about how William Shakespeare marginalized on his last days. Sir, what is your opinion about that Tempest novel, sir?
Okay, thank you, Sachin, for that question. But Shakespeare's life, personal life, we know some aspects of his life, but we really, a lot of it is clouded in mystery. And as you know, even the authorship of his plays is very much disputed. We have the Baconian theory, which says that it was actually Francis Bacon who wrote these dramas. There is also another theory that these dramas were written by Richard de Vere, another great contemporary of Shakespeare. So, so far, this is all speculation. We can say that that may have some support, or it may not have some support. I don't think we can really fix these kind of things. People, as you may see, the Baconian theory has a lot of its supporters, and there was one movie on Richard de Vere as the real writer of Shakespeare's plays, because they say that Shakespeare was relatively uneducated, and then the language that he has, the description of the places that he has in his dramas can only be done by someone who has traveled very well and who is very highly educated. So these kind of speculations will always keep coming, and I think, interesting as they are, we cannot come to any definite conclusion as such to see what exactly these stories will be. I think they're mostly based on individual preferences and individual likings and inclinations. I think beyond that, I don't think we can actually find out what exactly happened during Shakespeare's time or to him. So I would say we just read these things and say take them as very intelligent speculations, but they are only speculations.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, anybody would like to ask questions, interact with
There
sir.
are some questions in the chat box here. Uh, yeah, these are all very interesting questions, and they would take a lot of time to do that. Uh, so, uh, Shylock is right. He's marginalized because of his religion. That's true. As the killers of Christ, the Jews were uh, really marginalized. But Shakespeare shows him as a human being. So when he asks questions like, "Don't I bleed when you cut me?" and so on, these are all humanizing them, and that is, I think, one of the wonderful ways in which Shakespeare would show the humanity of almost everybody. Because I think, as a dramatist, he loved all human beings, irrespective of their backgrounds and weaknesses. Uh, Edmund, once again, is another controversial character. But there are a lot of these characters that go around. People like Malvolio, who Charles Lamb says was a victim of injustice and so on. So these are all, as long as you justify these things from within the drama, I think it's fine. These are all huge topics which we don't have the time to discuss now. But Edmund, of course, is again a very fascinating character, and he aligns himself with the bad people in the thing. But yeah, Edgar is another interesting character too. So it can lead to a lot of speculation, but we will maybe some other time address these issues. Um, this one is in Hamlet. We can see fully fledged marginalized character expressing their emotions with rigorous pace, as other characters express their feelings and emotions. What exactly is the question, Sandeep? Could you elaborate on that? Yeah, there are fully fledged, there are marginalized characters, like as I have shown you here, the grave diggers are the marginalized characters here, who play a central role in helping us understand the drama itself. Uh, yeah, so um, they play with words, they speak in riddles, and they interact with Hamlet, they talk about the past, and in that sense, it is a very fascinating kind of uh, dialogues that they have. Uh, this is where Denmark is, all the people of Denmark, the living and the dead meet. And it is thanks to these guys that this kind of interaction happens there. Okay, so I don't really understand the point that you're making here, but their way of talking and expressing ideas, I think Shakespeare is very careful about these things, and he gives them some really very powerful lines. I agree with you on that point.
Yes, sir. Is there anybody who would like to interact with Professor Veda Sharan, sir? I'll take up last one question. Thank you, dear audience. Before I call it a day, there are some announcements. Dharwad Katte has started 2 series, as you know, and today is the third Saturday. We have English talk, and next week, that is coming Saturday, sharp at 6 o'clock, we have another talk on Shakespeare, that is Shakespeare and Postmodernism by Dr. Manali Karmakar. That will be coming Saturday. I take this opportunity to thank Professor Veda Sharan sir, who has accepted our invitation, our request, and delivered a wonderful talk. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, my pleasure. I hope I have been of some use.
Yeah, definitely, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I also thank Professor Basavaraj Donur Dharwad Katte, who has been the backbone of all these events. Thank you, sir. I thank all our media persons who are making it possible to reach all the events to you through their electronics media and through their print media. I thank all the members of the Dharwad Katte and all the audience who are with us on this virtual platform and also on our social medias. Thank you, one and all. We meet again on the coming Saturday, sharp at 6 o'clock. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you once again to all of you and for being here. And thank you,
Thank
Professor
you, sir.
Prakash and Professor Donur. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And all the other colleagues in the university.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.